Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are in the Johnson edition. We turn now to poem 446. I showed her heights she never saw. Now, many have argued that this is another Sue poem and Emily is speaking directly to Sue. However, the scholar Ruth Miller has argued this is actually a poem of a dialogue between Christ and Emily. And we'll look at both sides of this as a potentiality. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily is our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments, and I'm hopeful as well you've worked through the preceding 445 poems so that you can place this poem in context. We just finished with 445. 'Twas just this time last year I died. Now, if you've been following our stuff, you know we've already seen a number of poems where Emily is making demands on Sue. We can think of poems 92, 203, 156 already come to mind immediately. Now, this is, I think, one of those poems, depending on who you think the person referenced, her referenced here is, if it is Sue, then you're going to read this poem quite differently. Now, one have called this Emily's brilliant, breathless lines. And we've seen this already in a number of poems. I also want to remind you that in a letter Emily wrote to Higginson, letter 562, she said, "No is the wildest word we consign to language." Notice the use of the yes and the no in this poem. I showed her heights she never saw. Wouldst climb? I said. She said, not so. With me, I said, with me, I showed her secrets, morning's nest, the rope the nights were put across. And now, wouldst have me for a guest? She could not find her yes. And then I break my life, and lo, a light for her did solemn glow, the larger as her face withdrew. And could she further know? Now, what's so much fun about reading Emily's poems out loud is that, for example, if you guys were listening to me read this poem and not reading along with me, you would maybe imagine that the last word of this poem is K-N-O-W, not N-O. Notice she'll begin by saying, I showed her heights she never saw. When we get to poem 453, she'll say it this way, Love, thou art high, I cannot climb thee. But were it two, who knows, but we taking turns at the Chimbrosa. Dusko, at last stand up by thee. Love, thou art deep, I cannot cross thee. But were there two instead of one, rower and yacht, some sovereign summer, who knows, but we'd reach the sun. Love, thou art veiled, a few behold thee, smile and alter and prattle and die. Bliss were an oddity without thee, nicknamed by God, eternity. This idea of course, elevation and climbing, some have read as sexual. Some, however, have seen this poem not as Emily talking about Sue, but rather as Christ talking to Emily. And Christ is the speaker. I showed her heights she never saw. And then notice the quotation marks. Wouldst climb, I said? In other words, shall we try and go higher? She said, not so. Here it's not so, later it'll be no. With me, I said, with me, notice with me, the first one, quotation marks, the second one without the quotation marks, and yet both me will be italicized. I showed her secrets. It's interesting the way Emily uses the word secrets. Morning's nest, the rope, the nights were put across, and now, and then back to quotation marks, wouldst have me for a guest. Now, again, there is an argument that the speaker of this poem for Emily is Christ, and Christ is asking Emily, when will you find your conversion experience? Which, by the way, Emily never found, as we've commented already. Notice, back to the she. She could not find her yes. You'll remember poem 172, 'tis so much joy if I could fail what poverty, and yet As poor as I have ventured all upon a throw, have gained, yes, exclamation point, hesitated so, this side, the victory. You'll remember her use of this yes. It makes us, of course, think of our study of Joyce's Ulysses, doesn't it? And especially the famous Molly section, huh? And then I break my life. Now, Ruth Miller has argued this is why you should read this as Christ is the one speaking, because break my life then obviously makes sense in terms of the sacrifice of the cross. And then I break my life, and lo, the religious language, the biblical language, a light for her did solemn glow, the larger as her face withdrew. And could she further know? Of course, here it's N-O. In other words, how is it possible that she could reject me? Or, of course, if you're following the Miller argument, that Emily could reject the beseeching voice of Jesus Christ. I think the point, however you decide to read this, at 2a, is that rejection is difficult. And it's hard to live with rejection. We've seen this, of course, in a number of poems already. At 2b, well, obviously the vague antecedents is what makes this poem so much fun to read. Who is she talking about in this poem? At 3a, other Sue poems immediately come to mind. Poems 92 and 203 and 156 we've already done. We'll get to another Sue poem at 1401. Finally, at 3b, how do you deal with rejection? And to what degree is reading Emily's whole treatment on this theme challenging you? I hope so. Thank you.